Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this workshop. Today, I'm going to cover training AI for personal assistants. Uh, Given a lot of AI assistants like ChatGPT and Claude or Perplexity have been doing uh, a huge uh, gaining a huge popularity in the current day. It makes sense to get familiar with what are the capabilities of these AI assistants and whether you could train your own AI for building your own personal assistants. Let me deep dive into what it means to build personal assistant and whether we could do that and with what skills. Let me define what an AI assistant is. Uh, Most of us have used some kind of AI assistant over the last 5 to 10 years, like either Alexa's or Google Homes or even Siri in most of our iPhones. The capabilities for these AI assistants have been limited in the sense that you could probably ask a single question and not without any context associated, and because of which you would have to either repeat the context every single time or your scope of questions is pretty limited. Because of which, the use of AI assistants has been limited to mostly around asking the weather for that day or setting a reminder or adding something to the calendar and very such limited tasks. And on top of that, the personalization is almost non-existent because if you cannot save any information about your personal preferences, then there's no way an AI assistant could recommend based on your preferences. So let's go into figuring out whether we could add personalization based on the recent advances in the AI. As I mentioned, the benefits for these personalized AI assistants are mostly the enhanced user experience. For example, I don't need to provide an entire context of my entire life. Every single time I ask a question, either to retrieve some of my past chats or to just bring up something that I'm looking for. I do not want to provide all of that as a context to a question, and hence enhance user experience if your AI is already trained on that. And improve task efficiency, as in if I quickly want to ask a question, I do not want to look for the appropriate context. Instead, assume that my AI knows about everything that I have done in the past, because of which I would be able to quickly get an answer to all of my tasks. And finally, the personalized recommendations. Assuming I have a lot of data stored and which is visible to AI, where it knows my personal preferences, either the food or the travel or place I work or place I visit over the holidays, etc., then the recommendations could be catered based on my behavior and actions in the past, which will widely improve the quality of the recommendations and its usefulness. With AI assistants like Alexa in the past, the context again is very much limited to what you set up in the app, like where your home is, where you are located, and whether there's any shopping or groceries located around you. And everything else is non-personalized, because of which, again, you would not, the recommendations were not always helpful. For any personalized data, there are three types that we can categorize to. The user preferences, for example, let's say I would want to talk in a particular language or prefer a particular voice, then I would pick one of that. Similarly, maybe I like to do a lot of trivia or like to hear about the daily news, or I need to add something to my calendar or places I visit, etc. All of them could come under user preferences. Or maybe I prefer short answers versus long answers, or vice versa. The second one is behavioral patterns. Let's say if I go to work at a particular time in a day, then I would want my AI assistant to either suggest me some things that I should remind of, or probably perform some actions that could help me just before leaving for work. These are all fall under the behavioral patterns, and it could also mean knowing my entire day-to-day schedule through my calendar, such as what are the meetings that I have today, and what are a few things that I do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's food or work or communications with my friends, etc. And finally, the historical interactions, which is almost also the most important. All the historical interactions have a context associated with it. For example, probably I'm talking to some of my friends or colleagues over the last few weeks or months, and I do not, and all of these historical interactions could be sufficiently lengthy to provide it as a one single question. Having all of this information stored as some kind of data type in in my data model would absolutely help so that the AI could use all three of these as input to provide good recommendations. For the technical approach, let's go into the technical details. Depending on how familiar you are with the AI training, there are three approaches such as fine-tuning existing models, transfer learning techniques, and continual learning strategies. Let me just a quick uh, intro into what fine-tuning existing models means. So as we know, there's models like there's chat assistants like ChatGPT, which have been doing extremely good, and Claude, which is very good for longer context, and so Gemini and several other language models. All of these are pretty good at remembering the entire knowledge of the world, which will help them in answering most of the generic questions, such as, "Hey, where is this located?" or "Where is how far is this from that place?" etc. However, if you have to ask something personalized to you, then since the large language model is not privy to that information, you would have to provide that additional context, input as context. In the initial models that we know, there's always a problem with the context length. For example, the latest version of GPT-4 has still only the 32,000 context length versus the other models which have uh, close to 1 million or even 2 million, which can provide more than 1,000 pages of information. So having a longer context helps because you could provide as much information as possible. But in certain cases where you have a plenty of personal history, probably a friend that you spoke to 10 years ago or over the last 10 years, and you would bring up that particular context suddenly, and that and if you have several of such conversations or interactions, that could certainly lead to more than 2 million context length. And this is where the idea of several startups where they were building their own AI, personalized AI assistants, where either they could provide a hardware such as Pendant or other devices that where you could store all of your day-to-day interactions or your past historical memory, through which it would provide your personalized answers, is one of the latest trend that's going on where folks are building these more personalized hardware devices or the apps that could do this for you. While online AI assistants do this a particular way, you might have to store or even see in a multi-model fashion what's happening around you to provide much more information to these models to understand what you are currently doing and how the model could provide you a better suggestion. Given this context, sometimes it might not be sufficient to have just a regular large language model that's available on the internet and trained publicly to be used for these models. And hence, we have different approaches on top of prompt engineering, such as RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, which is basically you are just storing your information in a bunch of paragraphs over a database. Let's call it vector database, which could be more like uh, storing your paragraph chunks so that whenever any question is asked, then a relevant paragraph is extracted from this database, and then uh, all these relevant paragraphs are combined as a context, and then a question is asked over them. So that's for the retrieval augmentation. And finally, the fine tuning. Instead of using the model trained on the entire public internet data, we also train it on additional personalized data that we have, which will help us uh, tune the model so that it could speak in a way that we do and also adapt to our tone, because more the data, usually the better the model gets adapted to. There are other few techniques such as transfer learning where you are, which has been more like, hey, I have a model where I would only use the last few layers to modify my weights, and then so that the new model that I have is using a combination of the initial internet widely trained data along with my personalized data. And finally, the continual learning strategies. This is where we would want to do this more often, because the personalized data gets updated in real time, or sometime depending on how fresh your assistant should be. It could be almost every day or every hour. So you need to figure out a strategy to do the continual learning. While data modeling or data training and looking for modeling techniques is one dimension of it, there's also the privacy concerns, which is the reason why most of the big companies are hesitant to work on this. Even for companies like Amazon, who built Alexa, not having to store the personalized data and still build a useful model is one of the biggest challenges, mostly because without it's very difficult to maintain the privacy while still having the ability to uh, annotate it, as well as ability to look at it and debug it without having a lot of privacy concerns, and then also store the data for the future use. So there's a lot of data protection and regulations that needs to be implemented for any user to uh, give your application their personalized data, because most of them would be afraid that it would be misused. The same with the consent and transparency. Most of the applications or the AI ones do have to get a consent, more like terms and conditions that you would throw at any new user, so that uh, the user signing up for sharing their personal data is familiar with these risks associated, and probably at least they would know whether their data is being trained for better experience, and whether this is something they are okay with. And it gives a lot of transparency. And finally, anonymization techniques. There's a uh, interesting way of handling this personalized data. For example, if there are a lot of uh, uh, sensitive either data or text or images or any information within your personalized data, you can always redact some of it or use some techniques to find the sensitive fields and then anonymize them, so that when you are using it for training uh, and then for inference, none of it get used for the models and you still get a decent output. Ethical considerations is one of the other dimensions that most companies and any small applications should consider in mind. The bias mitigation, because you have been training on the entire internet of data, which is using the large public models, they do have plenty of bias that gets reflected from the original text available on internet. So bias mitigation is an important step, especially for personalized data because if you do not represent the majority of the internet, which is almost not usually the case, because there's always dimensions where you would differ from the large uh, population. You would have to mitigate that bias or more make it more personalized for your use case. Whether it could be as simple as food preferences or cultural preferences or historical differences, all of that has to be considered under bias mitigation. And similarly, the fairness in AI decisions, there's always been, uh, based on the input data, there have been a gender, race, or any other discrimination, which has to be taken care of when you are training. So you have to make sure that there is fairness when the AI is trying to infer here. By inference, I mean for any AI model where you would actually train with the data, and once the model is ready, you would want to get the output by giving it sufficient input. And finally, the user autonomy and control. Let's say I want my AI assistant to be extreme, uh, to know only particular dimensions of my life and not about probably the professional uh, work issues or any other such dimensions, then I would want to have the control over what is being trained on so that I have the user autonomy and ability to control what it gives me as recommendations. This could be really useful for the user experience because not all would be comfortable with the level of detail that your AI assistant is uh, recommending you for any question that you ask. So having these three knobs provided so that the user could get a great experience is something every AI builder should consider. The biggest implementation challenges would be mostly around the data quality and quantity. For example, if you are training a personal assistant, then you would have to pick up the source of all your data. Either it could be something as simple as chats, probably WhatsApp chats, or iMessages, or even Facebook messages. And then sometimes it could be, if you are interested in multimodal uh, considerations, then maybe even uh, Instagram images and all the posts, which could be considered as your personal interactions with different people. And then, depending on your interest, you could also add professional or work-related data into it. So, as always, the quality of the data matters a lot. If you inject a lot of garbage, then mostly the recommendations are also based on that. So you have to make sure it's not just the quantity of all the communications, but also the quality that needs to be considered. And then the model update frequency, as we discussed, it's not sufficient to just train on the model just once in a year or a few months. You have to figure out what will be the appropriate model update frequency because then it would reflect your current state of mind and current preferences so that the recommendations are also based on the latest priorities that you have and the integration with existing systems. Having this AI as a separate app would defeat the purpose because you would have to open this app every single time. Instead, if this app could be integrated either with your WhatsApp or with your most top AI, top chat apps or the assistant, then you would be able to use it a lot easier seamlessly because both the data flow and the output from these personal assistant would be updated and easily available across different platforms. So some of the best practices in the industry are more around figuring out what would be the way to filter this data so that we don't throw a huge mountain of text and hope that the AI assistant is smart enough to figure out which exact uh, chunk of text would be useful. So you always have to maintain a high quality of content so that you could remove unnecessary data uh, that could be not be useful for the model. Similarly, the encryption and secure storage, because it's personal data, which is usually uh, either guarded by several other cloud storage accounts, you would want to have a secure storage for your personal data or sensitive data so that you do not want to be in an embarrassing position when either some of your chats or sensitive information is on public. And finally, some folks do not want any of their personal information to be ever trained for an AI for several reasons. And it's very important to respect user privacy and provide them the user opt-out options. Most of uh, the privacy sensitive companies like Apple and others have a huge push on the user opt-out, and every other AI product has to follow these to have the user respect the privacy. So, in conclusion, the biggest aspects of this are more around balancing personalization and privacy, because the more information you give, the more personalized the data could be. However, there should be a balance between uh, what you would want the AI assistant to know versus what you could get the help with. So, figuring out that right balance of personalization and privacy would be the best way to go forward, and also for the user to get the great experience. And responsible AI development, this is where you would have to be really careful not to misuse the user's data who would trust you with their personal data, either to share it with third-party customers or selling the data or misusing it to train model across several different users. All of these are considered as violations for uh, building these such models, and hence it's very important you make sure that you are building AI in a responsible way. That's this concludes most of the important things that's happening in personal AI, AI for personal assistant. Some of the future trends are more for federated learning, which means you have to make sure that you could learn from multiple folks, but you do not want to learn any sensitive data or point it back point back any of the things that you learned to the origin of source. On-device personalization is more like I would want to train my model on my entire local device, uh, either on my mobile device or my laptop, so that my data never goes out to external language models or providers. And this on-device personalization helps a lot to achieve that. And it's an active area of research, and a lot of AI apps are trying to make this happen so that the privacy is taken care of. And finally, adaptive AI assistants, because the world changes fast and the number of things a person do maybe is in the order of hundreds. It's important that the AI assistant can adapt to the user's multitasking. Let's say if I'm talking to five people with five different contexts, and I am maintaining that train of thought, then my AI assistant also has to follow a similar structure. And the future trends are more around making these possible. So it's very important that we follow as many of these as possible. And I expect most of the future AI assistants to have most of these. Currently, the Siri and Alexa and the other top ones are far away from these requirements. However, the new wave of AI assistants like uh, the ones from OpenAI or Claude are very close enough to providing these. And as more and more research and open source uh, development goes on, then we would be seeing these. And I would recommend most of the hackathon participants to follow and try to answer and keep in mind some of these aspects when you are building your apps. Any other questions? Uh, Otherwise, thanks a lot, everyone, for attending this workshop.